Hello, everyone. This is Matt with the Grappling Podcast, and today's episode is a very special episode for Levi and I. In today's episode, we interview Rob Biernacki, and we're also joined by Dusty Hjelle. For those who are new to grappling, I would honestly put Rob on the Mount Rushmore of thought leaders in the grappling space. Rob has had a massive impact on the grappling body of knowledge through his conceptual-based approach of how to think about and how to train jiu-jitsu. Rob is a black belt and also the owner and head coach of Island Top Team, located in Nanaimo, British Columbia. And then Dusty is a brown belt under Rob, and he's also the owner and head coach of Drengr Jiu Jitsu, located in Duluth, Minnesota. So if you find yourself in the Duluth area and you're looking to train, please stop by Drengr. Everyone there was super friendly. We were at a seminar the day after recording this, and honestly, everybody was awesome, super skilled at jiu-jitsu. It was a really good environment, good culture. We had a good time. So we ended up breaking this episode into two parts due to the massive amount of knowledge bombs being dropped. So in this episode, you can look to learn what are Rob's alignment principles and how to use them to improve your understanding and abilities in grappling. We also cover how concepts can be the underlying theme that drives how you think about developing and development in jiu-jitsu, and then also how to design your training to enhance those specific skills and those concepts. Also, we focus on how movement quality and chasing the perfect process can actually give you the outcomes that you're looking for. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We honestly cover a lot more in this episode. So if you're interested in improving as a grappler for as long as possible, this episode is definitely for you. And also, if you enjoy this episode, which I'm pretty sure you will, please make sure to share it with a friend. That's how we grow the podcast. We don't run ads for the podcast or anything like that at this point. And if you enjoy what Rob has to say, please make sure to support his work. He's got amazing content out there. He has a subscription site known as bjjconcepts.net, and he also has instructionals on grapplearts.com. Both are amazing resources. So without further delay, here's our interview with Rob Biernacki and Dustin Hjelle. We hope you enjoy. So, Rob, I have a confession to make.
Oh boy. He does that most of the podcasts. It's some sort of confession.
I've actually been a Rob Biernacki fanboy for a while. And
they exist.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually a real thing?
Not a.
I was being like tongue in cheek about it, but I really do like your stuff.
I mean, it's a failing testament to the state of the world that I have like fanboys, but yeah.
But no, I was actually on a plane and I was watching the BJJ formula. And
old school.
Yeah, and I remember watching it going like, thank you. And I got so excited. Because
so you had trained jiu-jitsu for a little bit.
Yeah, I trained jiu-jitsu for maybe like 3 to 6 months, and I had two burning questions that nobody seemed to be able to answer. And one of them was, how do you start? And then that's where you start talking about the engagement phase. Because I would go up and I asked black belts that question. I asked like just essentially anybody who would listen to me. I was like, how do you start? And they're like, oh, you grab a grip, or I do this. I stand in combat base.
I like to do this is my
like
least favorite phrase in jiu-jitsu. Well, os is my least favorite phrase, but
And but then you're like, it's an engagement phase, and I'm like, oh, thank you. And then the frames, levers, the whole alignment system. It was just like, oh, this is so nice. Like I have a very process-driven career, and so I build processes and I test processes and do all these different things. And the fact that you took that whole structure of jiu-jitsu and to kind of gave this like loose framework that's actually very applicable was a huge aha moment, and I loved it. And ever since then, I've been a huge fan of your stuff. I really, really like it.
Thank you very much for saying that. I will say this. You are lucky that it was only 3 or 6 months before you found it, because I've gotten emails, and they're gratifying in one sense, and they're humbling in another sense. They are depressing in a lot of the time, because what I get is like, I've been training for 10 years. I'm a black belt, or I'm a purple belt that's been training for 8 years, and I was about to quit. No, literally, the phrase "I was about to quit jiu-jitsu." And then I saw your material, and it made sense to me for the first time, and I understood why I was struggling with certain things, and yada, yada, yada. So like fortunately it doesn't happen as often anymore, because when that material was released, we're talking 2016.
Okay.
Right? So this was almost 10 years ago. There was literally nothing out there that created a framework like this. Nowadays, we're a little spoiled for choice when it comes to like good instruction compared to the early days, right? I'd still say most people aren't teaching conceptually, but enough are, and I'd say the community at large is so aware of it that if you just need to go somewhere to get those answers, like, hey, what's a framework that makes sense for what jiu-jitsu is, right? That's available now. I'm not the only person you can get it from. But back then, so I'd say for probably about the first 4 or 5 years after this stuff came out and before the proliferation of more conceptually grounded material, I would get emails like this probably once a month.
Dang.
And I was like, oh, dude, I mean, A, that's cool that you found it and that you're still training. But also, holy shit, that is so sad that you spent, half a decade in a beautiful art that you felt like a total outsider in because you were looking for a more cerebral approach. And I think there are way more people out there like that than there should be, because even in this day and age where we have got a lot of access to pretty good information, I would still say a lot of schools are teaching kind of the like, here's a warm up and then 3 random moves and then roll. And if somebody asks a question like your question, they say, well, this is what I like to do.
Yeah.
And they can't really give you an understanding of what is the underlying mechanism at play.
There was another part that you touched on that was a big aha moment for me as well, where when I would ask that question, how do you start? Sometimes I would get the answer, you get a grip.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, how? Like where? Why am I getting this grip? What is this grip supposed to lead to? What if they grab me, right? Like those were a lot of questions that also popped up right away, and you addressed those too,
Sure.
which I thought was really, really helpful.
Well, so the thing is that like those questions are addressed very well in judo, which is a real sport, right? And like the fact that a dingus like me had to come along to some degree and like put it all out there is again a failing testament to like the level of pedagogy and the level of just thought that's been put into how to teach jiu-jitsu, because grip fighting in a grappling art being important like should be like so unbelievably obvious, and the person who dominates the initial grip exchange being the one that's going to dictate the rest of what's happening should be so glaringly obvious. And yet and I don't know how true is this now, but like when I started training, and certainly let's say in the like mid 2000s to mid 2010s, the vast majority of clubs, the rolling happens like this. We slap hands, and then I grab your collar, you grab my sleeve, and and we agree to grips. And everyone rolls that way almost all the time. And the only people doing any grip fighting are people who compete. So like the standard of what was being taught at, like again, probably 90% or more of jiu-jitsu schools as far as grip fighting goes was after somebody grabs your collar, here's how you break that grip if you don't want them to be grabbing your collar.
Funny.
Not like, hey, I don't want you to have any goddamn grips on me whatsoever because that's bad for me, right? Like that's just an example of like, what the hell are we doing here, folks, when this guy... I had to figure brought this idea to the mainstream if I did, which I'm not sure I did, but like, yeah.
Well, I think it was people like Ryan Hall too that kind of came into the scene versus having all these, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champions have volumes, 4 volumes long of just like 20 different armbar variations on Jiu-Jitsu and all that stuff. And then here comes Ryan Hall with like open elbows and all that stuff. It was fantastic. It was like taking this concept of like, this is why and when and how to do things to find it within matches. But it wasn't like frameworks overall, but it was like, wow, what a great tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, we would probably be a good 5 to 10 years behind on pedagogy in jiu-jitsu if Ryan Hall hadn't put his material out when he did. Because we were talking, mid 2000s. Mid to late, like maybe 2008-ish kind of. And prior to that, I mean, Damian Maya had an excellent set called Science of Jiu-Jitsu, but I wouldn't say it was particularly like popular.
Sure.
Just because I don't think he spoke great English at the time.
Yeah, I remember the art cover of that, which looked pretty technical. So I was it just was nowhere near as universally received or
pirated, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people, yeah.
Well, he was saying that's why he cut off a lot of his instructionals because
That's
it was
why
becoming,
he stopped doing, because it
yeah.
was, yeah. And I mean, that's probably a separate topic that I'm not super qualified to discuss. But the value of that, like, I know for me, that was the first time somebody spoke about jiu-jitsu in the way that I thought about jiu-jitsu. And so obviously I'm hugely influenced by Ryan. And I think the community in general really owes him a debt of gratitude as far as, like I said, probably 5 years, maybe 10 years.
100%.
Because yeah, like I know when my material came out, I got a lot of like, hey, this is kind of like Ryan Hall, and I wish Ryan put more stuff out. And so I probably got to take and run with it. And then, there's more material that has come out more recently where people are speaking about this stuff. And even when I put my material out, I think Kit Dale had something out, because I did get a few.
What was that?
I got a few people that like sort of found me because they had seen Kit Dale's material.
He had some like guard passing stuff.
It was
like,
it was a conceptual.
Yeah.
like
him and Nick
Gregoriadis. Yeah, they had put something out, and like I got a really good level of uptake from people who had seen their material, but they just wanted something a little bit more, like, I guess, grounded in physics, or like I can't even remember, like, because I haven't seen that stuff.
I had bought in that, and
Yeah.
like there are some good ideas in there, but the language being used was too vague. It was hard to really connect to or understand without.
That's
deeper
what
explanation.
I've gotten a lot of, is people that are like, basically the language was too vague.
Yeah.
I've had people say the same thing about a few different instructors that are like, I think are very good instructors, but the language they use, and I'm not saying that this doesn't make me right and them wrong, it's just the language they use is vague in a way that some people don't like, because some people like vague language.
10th Planet.
I am way too
Extreme
autistic
language,
to like to get anything out of vague language. You got to be goddamn specific with me. Like, like I've got to be like the worst person to date. Do you like me? Because you're gonna have to tell me in very, very uncertain terms that you like me, because otherwise I won't know. Kind of thing, right? So like you got to hit me over the head with it, right? I shouldn't say to date, but to like try to get the point across that you want to date me, sort of thing. So like if you don't really spell it out.
Oh yeah, this lady, she just moved in,
Yeah, I don't know
my
what it is.
house.
But like, I've had friends in the past be like, dude, that chick is into you. I'm like, no. They're like, no, dude, recognize the signals, man. Right? So like, if you're not pretty specific with your terminology, I kind of view it as like, okay, what are we talking about here? You probably don't know what you're talking about, which is not true. Obviously, like there are guys who are
Cranial
incredibly
Cranial
knowledgeable. But
move in your head.
But their language is so vague that it doesn't convey the point to people who are like, who just learn better with really concrete kind of Newtonian physics sort of based language, or more like, let's say, like biomechanical terminology, where like if we're talking about the human body,
like specific.
let's
It's
talk
very
about like
specific, right?
specifically like pronation and supination and internal rotation of the shoulder and external, like that kind of stuff. So I think people really gravitated to that, and that maybe what I was talking about wasn't necessarily super unique, or like certainly I didn't come up with the idea of base, posture, and structure being important things. It's just that I gave very specific definitions of what those things were. Like I said, I kind of took that from Ryan Hall and really ran with it, because that was something I like was lacking in my experience and my training. And so I thought, okay, if I like what he did, and that really helped my jiu-jitsu, and I can take that and like really dive deep into the underlying kind of like mechanical physics-based stuff, that's something that's a bit lacking. And since then, I've just tried to grow it and expand on it. Like Dusty and I were talking about how different the way I teach and communicate is now versus 2-3 years ago versus 5 years ago. So as I gain experience, as I gain exposure to different methods, I try to like just add that to the structure, add that to the concepts, or like whatever framework I've built. It's not static. But it was definitely at the time like the first product that was like, here's a concrete set of concepts.
Yeah.
That's then going to be built on with a set of movement patterns. That's then built on with a set of training methods, right? Because I introduced the idea of fuck your jiu-jitsu, which was essentially like constraints-based learning and gamification in that instructional. And I know that stuff is like the new hotness now, but it really ain't, because like that very
I remember
first
you
product, right?
talking about it for a while, and I was trying to figure out like how you were structuring it, because you
Yeah.
did touch on it at the very end of the BJJ formula.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, Rob, give me more information on this. I need to know like how this all works, you know?
You actually made it through a whole.
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
that's an impossible feat.
Yeah,
Give
I
this
made
guy
it
a
through
medal.
2 full instructionals. One is Rob's, the other one was Power Top by Craig Jones. Those are the only 2. It's actually like pretty concise.
Concise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, so that element of like, here's a way of thinking about jiu-jitsu. Here's essentially a curriculum of approaches, top, bottom, back. Like those were the volumes. So there was the concepts one, there was the top game, there was the bottom game, there was the back, and then the methodology of how to train it. I wish there was more demand for the gamification stuff back then, because I was trying to push it, but I'm A, not a salesman, and B, certainly back then had essentially no profile in the jiu-jitsu community. Like, I put out an instructional that it ended up being extraordinarily popular. But like I believe that to this day, and Stefan will probably correct me, but it's either the most popular or maybe Modern Leg Lock Formula became the most popular product he had ever put out. And he had already done some like really popular stuff. But it was basically Stefan Kesting has a name, and he is essentially lending me the credibility of being somebody that he wants to work with. And back then, you know, the BJJ Fanatics wasn't really much of a thing. I don't know if they existed in the format they do now. Instructionals were like, again, Ryan Hall's were really popular, but he really didn't want to be putting material out. At that point, he was focused on other stuff. And so it was kind of the only thing out there like it. And so it was popular for that reason. Like, Stefan was shocked by how popular it was. When we released it, it was released in app form.
Just so you know, I'm responsible for about probably 100 of those sales now. more realistically 3, but yeah.
Yeah, but when it came out, he first released it in app format.
Oh, that's right.
And then it came out.
I
in
had
like
it on
this-
Android. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
even rewatch it now
So
that I have an iPhone.
people kind of they
gotta get it on
noticed
DVD.
they realized when it came out that it came out back attacks first, then the other stuff, and then core concepts. Even though it was filmed and it was meant to be presented core concepts first, then bottom game, then top game, then back attacks last. And his opinion was, I don't think we can sell this to people if we lead with the concepts, because I need to give them the candy. I need to give them the back attacks. And that I'm like, dude, the back attacks is essentially 50% Ryan Hall stuff and some other stuff that I do. But like, this is not groundbreaking. It's not new. It's not like, you know, and then the first thing that he put out was like chair sit video. I'm like, motherfucker, you're just sending me down the river as a Ryan Hall clone. You were like, I was like, come on, man. Right. So like, there was, in his opinion, not a easy way to sell a concept based instructional. And then when it came out, he was like, okay, you were right. Like, there's a lot of appetite for this. And it was very, very popular. But like I said, there was no like overall appetite in the community for like games, like constraints based stuff, yada, yada. So like, I mentioned it and I would bring it up.
Yeah.
But he wasn't getting a bunch of like people asking for that.
I should have emailed in.
Right. And it wasn't until pretty recently that the idea of learning jiu-jitsu through games was like a thing that a bunch of people definitely wanted to get on board with. And so, when we put out our recent one, people were like, "Oh, I guess Rob's jumping on the bandwagon." And I was like, "Go fuck yourself."
Yeah, I know.
I've been doing this shit for a decade and a half, and I've been trying to promote it all over the place.
Yeah.
It's just
I
maybe
was more
because
so
of,
like, yes, finally,
yeah,
finally he made it.
But it's because I would just be like, "Hey, I have this methodology. I think it's cool. It's called fuck your jiu-jitsu, yada, yada, yada," and not like the hard sell that like, if you're doing anything other than this, you're wrong and an idiot. And that's maybe what it took for people to like get on board with this, is just a way more aggressive sales pitch. But yeah, like when the first one came out, that was the template. Is like, there are concepts at the beginning, and then there's a general kind of curriculum of movement-based approaches, and there's a methodology for how to get good at it, even if you're not a great athlete and you're not training 5 times a week, twice a day, yada, yada, yada. The game part got lost at the end. And so now, people are way more willing to listen to that. So I'm trying to, like, now when I do seminars, half the time I just teach them how to do fuck your jiu-jitsu. Like, I don't teach a whole lot of technique. It's just, here's how you play this game, because gameplay is actually really difficult to coach. And I think that there's a little bit of a fad right now. I don't think gameplay is a fad. I think there's a fad where people who aren't great coaches are looking at this as a shortcut to trying to be good coaches. And I guarantee you those same guys in a few years are not going to be doing it, because it's hard to do well. Designing constraints and designing games is difficult. So unless you just, and when I say rip off, I don't mean it negatively, but like, unless you just use someone else's games, someone who's good at this stuff, you're probably designing really like suboptimal training. So like it's good coaching is difficult no matter what, whether you do it the more conventional way, whether you do it, a hybrid of a couple different ways, whether you're entirely games based, like, doesn't matter how you go at it. To be a good coach is difficult. And I think most people who run a jiu-jitsu business are not willing to do the work of being a good coach, because it's not necessarily lucrative. It can be, but it's not necessarily lucrative.
I'll say, Dusty, do you find yourself utilizing a lot of the games at your place?
Yeah, I mean, it was Rob's stuff that got me going down that whole path. I mean, almost 5 years ago, when I was still at the old gym I was part of, and then starting to coach a little bit, like on Saturday mornings, and just out of that drive to like, this drilling is kind of boring. Let's go a little out into learning like the idea of fuck your jiu-jitsu and how you can do that. I'm like, oh, this is fun. Like, I remember the first time doing daily Hiva stuff. We would work, one person was trying to like just work the off balancing, and the other person's, you're trying to clear the feet off the hips and get into like a headquarters position. And just that little bit of live work, like seeing in my own game, the massive improvements after one session, I was like, okay, I'm sold.
Yeah.
And then across the board.
Was it a hard sell when it came to getting your training partners to understand that it's not you have a win condition and I have a win condition? Have you guys, like, I guess when you teach it at your school, or when you teach it at your school, like, is there like certain dialogue that you use to help people understand that it's like, because like some training partners will come in and then they'll go, okay, we're drilling. And then they'll think that you're doing a guard passing drill when it's actually the other person's doing a guard retention drill, and there's a huge difference between like what it means to be a good participant in that process, right? Like, like how do you guys explain it?
So that's why, like, when I say I teach seminars on how to play a game, the information that you, and like, this is probably the earliest in a podcast that I will have remembered to mention the visiting student program. We have a visiting student program at my academy. If you hit up islandtopteam.com, or you find me on social media on Instagram, Island Top Team, at Island Top Team, you can get in touch with us, and you can schedule basically a visit, and we offer a free week of training and accommodation. So like, all you got to do is schedule the visit and get there. So, pay for your plane ticket and all that. But once you're there, I mean, I won't pay for your food, but like, you can stay with me and you can train for free for a week. And people sometimes extend their stay, and then there's, you can pay for that. But like, people from all over the world visit us. So we get, and like, generally speaking, they know who I am, because if they didn't, how would they have heard about the program? So what I get a lot of is like, people show up and they've got my material and they know what fuck your jiu-jitsu is, and they know what different games are and all that stuff. And yet they feel like during the course of the week, they're like, oh, now I really understand how to play this game. Because unless you've got a room full of like basically full-time athletes who are highly motivated, et cetera, designing games is difficult under the best of circumstances. Even if you have a room full of like full-time athletes, there's still going to be a way that you have to communicate like, hey, here's how we play this game, because their default is just going to be to go ham, right? And so, I think we were talking about like the way we communicate it changes over time. One of the best ways, and this doesn't apply to all games, so there's like, let me say this, but one of the best ways, because so some games are going to be finite games, some games are going to be infinite games, some games are going to be cooperative, some games are going to be like a zero sum, some games are going to be like, here's a win condition for one participant, here's a win condition for another participant. There's a guy who can't remember his name, but he has a game that he calls designated winner. So like
Josh McKinney.
Josh McKinney, that's right. Yeah.
How does that game go?
Do you want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just more, it's not necessarily a specific game, but it's the attitude of there's one person that is designated like it's known that they are going to win. And they're doing a game. I think, for example, kind of like a game we were playing the other night in our one-on-one class. I was having the one-on-one class people working on half guard, passing and escaping. And so we gave the game of, okay, we're going to start with a near side underhook. Top person you're just trying to work on holding that bottom person down as long as possible. Once the bottom person gets out, because they will, and then you're going to go to a crossface, same thing. Once they get out, and then you're going to go to a far side underhook. So that way they get used to the same position. But it was known that, hey, this bottom person, they're going to win. You're just trying to get a feel for the position. And then once you're done, you go ahead, switch. The other person does it. And so there's that knowing like, oh, they're going to win, but I'm just trying to maintain this position as long as possible versus I'm trying to win.
Yeah.
And they're trying to win. And
yeah, so there's like, depending on what the game is and whether it is, because there's like, there are just different categories of games. So how you have to explain to the participants how to do the game is dependent a little bit on the category of the game. And this is where I think how I do it and how certain people do it definitely differentiates from how you would see it done in like a, for lack of a better term, pure eco approach, where the idea of modulating intensity, from what I've heard proponents of it say, they either believe that modulating intensity isn't possible, which I don't think is the case, or the way that they achieve it is simply by extending the duration of the game or whatever, which again, which can work. But what I strive for is, especially because I'm not teaching high level athletes. Like I would say I have like a very hobbyist gym. The people at my club who compete are not competing at a super high level. They're competing pretty recreationally. Certainly I don't have any professional grapplers that train with me at my home gym. Like I have guys who could potentially qualify as that, who have me as their coach, who have sought me out for coaching. But in terms of like who I coach on a day-to-day basis at Island Top Team in Nanaimo, I coach recreational grapplers. Even the ones that are pretty into it and compete like fairly regularly, they are by no means at the pro level. So what I'm working with is very different clay than what some prominent coaches are working with. And so if, the experience that I have is just to get people to do a bunch of rounds of games. And I know people who've had the same experience as coaches. They're like, they try it, and their school suffers because they start losing students. To have people doing like an hour of like full intensity sparring gameplay and then an hour of sparring, like of rolling.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And
I feel like you wouldn't even be retaining anything at that point.
No. If you're not basically a professional athlete, you're fucked. You're going to get hurt, or B, you're just going to not come to training that often, or you're going to become overtrained or whatever. Like if you don't have a very athletically prepared body, that is a level of physical demand that is not possible for a twice a week hobbyist to do. It's just not. So the idea that you can't modulate intensity, I don't think is accurate. But the art of communicating how to modulate intensity it's bloody difficult to get people. And this is where like I attribute the vast majority of my success as an athlete, as a master's division competitor, et cetera, is to my ability to, and my training partner selection, but my ability to modulate my intensity in a way where I don't get injured that much when I train. It's not that I don't ever get injured, but like considering, and I also don't train that often. So I roll 3 times a week for the most part. And it's not like I do like 15 rounds on the days that I train. I will generally train for about an hour. So I'm getting, anywhere from like, let's say 8 to 10 rounds.
Do you take like time off in between each round and just sit there and recuperate, focus on quality?
Usually,
oh, okay.
A minute and a half. So not like a huge amount. But I also don't get my conditioning from rolling. I don't ever try to roll to exhaustion, and I don't even try to roll all that hard most of the time. What I'm doing is trying to, we talked about this, perfect movement quality. Whether I'm playing a game or doing a live roll, I have a very different goal. And what I find is that the people at my club or the people that I train, at affiliates or whatever, the ones that can most closely replicate kind of the platonic ideal of how to roll and play these games are the ones that progress the fastest by far. And so, like I said, the art lies in how do you communicate that. So one of the things that I think is the most beneficial, and this is a phrase that I got from Chris Paynes, is as a training partner, you are trying to be a level designer or a puzzle designer. And you want to find a level of challenge for your training partner that is high enough that they're interested and they don't want to quit because it's too difficult. But not so it's not so high that they're like, damn, I can't do this. But it's not so low that they get bored. So there's kind of a middle, or it's probably not a middle, but it's like, again, the psychology term is optimal state of arousal, where you're so interested in video game designers, they study this. So like, how can I get somebody addicted to this game where all they want to be doing is playing this game? And that's kind of what I'm seeking out, where like I want to communicate all of the different games and how to play them in a way where you are able to elicit that as a training partner or facilitate that as an individual and how you train. So I'm trying to have that be how everything I do goes. And I'm trying as best as I can, which is to say like I get better at it a lot over time, is finding ways to teach people how to play these games or just how to roll. Like I taught a seminar not too long ago at Bellingham BJJ, and it was basically like, here's how you do fuck your jiu-jitsu sweeping. And I went through a couple things, and then there was a Q&A, and there were a lot of questions about, okay, well, in this scenario, how do I do this? And so like I probably spent another like 30-40 minutes after the presented seminar material, because the people there just hadn't, even some of them were familiar with my work, but they just hadn't really received much instruction in like, okay, here's a game, yeah, that's cool, and here are the rules of the game, and yeah, that's cool, but in terms of what am I bringing to the table, right? Like as a participant, like how am I approaching this? Do I want to win? If I want to win, how do I want to win? Like yes, I can meet the win conditions, right? So, we kind of talked about the idea of like the spirit of the game versus the
letter of the law.
The letter of the law, right?
That's like we were doing a takedown game, wrestling coach design. It was, part of it was, I forget what starting position. Oh, it was from a front headlock. And one of the conditions for the person on top was you were working to get the other person's elbows down to your mat. And there'd be a couple times I'd be working with somebody and they'd knock me down to my hip. Clearly, like, functionally speaking, I have lost. Yeah. But I was able to keep my elbows up, and I'd be like, well, technically.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Full realization, like,
It's
yeah,
like it's like
dude,
getting
I
out of
lost.
back to go to mount. You know.
and this is the problem, honestly, with almost any game, right? Like if you even like when we talk about jiu-jitsu overall as a game, right? Like, okay, we're gonna go compete in a jiu-jitsu game, right? A competition, and these are the rules. And there's always the guy that's gonna show up and is like, well,
Yeah.
I've found a way. Like, have you guys ever read Tim Ferriss and
Where he
like,
does the ring outs.
yeah.
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 Like there are people who do that with jiu-jitsu. They're like, here, I found this rule and I can exploit this rule, and it's got nothing to do with the spirit of what we're doing here. But
Like people
Yeah.
turtling away and
turtle,
keeping it
well, like,
inside.
so, you know, and like perfect example, like rest his soul, Leandro Lowe. Motherfucker perfected playing on the perimeter. So that like it was really hard. Like that shit that he did at the beginning of a match where he like danced around the edges. That wasn't just like a thing. He was like getting a feel for
Calibrating.
right? Like, oh, this is where the edges of the mat are. And as long as I'm on that outside edge, you're gonna have a real hard time scoring on me. Right. And like, and I'm not criticizing that at all. 'Cause
Yeah, it's a strategy,
he was
right?
also like a genius at passing, and like his jiu-jitsu was very good. But that's just one thing where like that was a really cagey, clever exploitation of the fact that we have really horseshit rules in the IBJJF for going out of bounds. Right? They try, right? So like there's always going to be like, no matter what, as long as you put the parameters of a game are this, there's always the person that's showing up like, yeah, but what if?
Well, you've made the
Right.
joke before about the no time limit for submission only.
Oh,
And
yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
I'll just wait till you fall asleep. I'll stay as awake as
Yeah.
possible
Yeah.
until you fall asleep.
There will definitely
Yeah.
be a guy who will like mini max that
Right.
by just like doing a crazy amount of steady state cardio, where like if you had to have a sub only match against like a triathlon
Yeah.
or marathon runner, and like he knew just enough jujitsu to not get like insta subbed for a little while, and also just enough jujitsu to lay a bit of a pace on you,
Yeah.
where you started to get tired.
I think that was a strategy people were talking about with Gordon with some of these like 30 or 45 minute matches where he would just put guard passing pressure on them
Yeah.
to tire them out. And basically at that
And
point, it
then
looks
you
like he can go do whatever he wants.
Whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
So there's always a way to figure out. Like I have a dispositional approach to jiu-jitsu, which is like I believe in the purity and beauty of the art. As much as I'm a nerd that talks about frames and levers and da 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 da, I also just think that there's an innate beauty in the physical expression of jiu-jitsu. Like I love watching Rafa Mendez because he's the best, but also because the way he does it is visually appealing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's how my girlfriend got into jiu-jitsu, was watching him.
Yeah,
Not because of his
Whether
looks.
on or off.
Yeah, exactly.
Visually,
Yeah.
he's visually appealing
Yeah.
on a lot of
Yeah, I
levels,
was
right?
very- yeah.
So like I like watching, and I like the as much as I also like shit on traditional martial arts because I think they have a lot of very negative, very culty practices. I think there's a tremendous amount of like truth and accuracy in the idea of pursuing a perfect moment, even if like it's fleeting, right? Like there have been times where like I can still recall with incredible clarity a couple of moves that I've hit in my life, like where I've thrown someone. And
I was gonna say judo moves have
like
that.
judo- they have
Totally
that, like-
have that. Yeah.
Like there's a Harai Goshi that I hit on Corey years ago, where this is a 180-pound man and he felt absolutely weightless. Like I just caught him exactly right. And I'm not great at judo or anything, but I can only imagine what some of these like
Now you're chasing the dragon, trying to make that happen again. You know.
No, so I'm smart enough not to. Right? Like, I was like,
You just took the win.
I just did the Costanza. I'm like, I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
never doing judo again. I'm out. Right? But like those moments are so beautiful, and I like that's why I do jujitsu. Like I'm not in this for like the grind of winning an adult world championship. Like I've won Nogi Worlds in the Masters division, which I think is a fantastic achievement. And
Yeah.
it's certainly the best I'm going to do. But like people call me a world champion, I say I won gold at Nogi Worlds in the Masters division. Like I try very hard not to refer to myself as a world champion because I'm not down with like title inflation and all that. So like, I do want to win at a high level, but I want to win by having better jiu-jitsu. So like my motivation is if I can't beat you by like just genuinely being better at the stuff that I consider to be, good jiu-jitsu technique, then I don't care, right? Like
It's winning's the byproduct of your perfect execution of jiu-jitsu.
Exactly. The goal isn't to win. The goal is to win because I'm doing something that is it coincides with my long-term goals, which is like I always say, I want to be doing jiu-jitsu when I'm 70, and I want to be getting better for as long as I do jiu-jitsu. I know that won't be possible. Like I haven't hit this wall yet, but like when I turned 40, I started saying to like a couple of my black belts, I was like, this is probably the last year that I'm going to be able to hang with you. This is probably the last year. I'm like Elon Musk promising full self-driving. Like this year, it's gonna happen, right? So it hasn't happened yet, but it's gonna. Like there's gonna be a point where I'm like 57, and I'm not gonna be able to keep up with one of my black belts who's 30. Like I said, it hasn't happened yet, but it's largely because Rory's lazy as fuck, right? Like if Rory trained 5 days a week, he would probably be kicking my ass at this point.
You had mentioned earlier about in your 30s being more physical. Mm-hmm. What was that transition looking like for you to go from whatever kind of physicality based game you're playing to shifting to more towards this posture-based alignment?
It's not that I shifted towards it as I got older. That's how I was doing it. It's just I had more physical abilities. Mm-hmm. So like A, I could train longer. B, I could train more frequently. C, like if I had to try to like muscle something a little bit, I could do it. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I started focusing more on this stuff. I was all like from, before getting my black belt, this was still my focus. Yeah. It's that now it's my only focus. Like when I train, all I'm looking for is how can I do this with a minimum amount of physical input and a maximum amount of just like timing and smoothness. And so like I'd say that what's evolved the most for me in my 40s is that I've tried to hit that like that ideal of just like, where like the definition of jiu-jitsu is being like a yielding art where like you never try to oppose what somebody does.
It's like Ryan Hall would say, like it's water kind of like what it was clashing against each other kind of thing.
Well, that's a Bruce Lee quote, right? Yeah. Like where water can become the cup or it can crash or it can flow. And so I think that is like, while I've tried to find very intellectualized ways of communicating jiu-jitsu, because I think the more concretely you can the more you can put it in like the words of the real world, right? Like if you tell somebody, I want you to become like water, where it can crash, they'll be like, that's nice, hippie. Go back. Like
I'm drowning.
Like this is not helpful.
I sweat a lot. Right?
Like this is not helpful to the majority of people. Yeah. So what I've tried to do is communicate it in a way where like these are the basic physics of the world that we inhabit. And here are the prerequisites for you to understand how to manipulate a human body and prevent your body from being manipulated.
If you would, could you actually, because we're a little bit into this, and we actually haven't even talked about what the alignment principles are.
Sure.
So can we touch on that for a moment?
Absolutely. So alignment is just a catch-all term for how we position our body to perform any like physical activity, right? Alignment is just a word that means that something is going to go straight, right? Like you're aligned, like we're going in the same direction. So like the way that most people would know it is it's a car thing, right? Like if your car has good alignment, it drives straight. And if your car has bad alignment, it's rickety and it pulls to the side. Therefore, it will wear out sooner. Like that's the best way for people to understand it. So alignment with your body is the same thing. If you have good alignment, your body will do whatever thing you're trying to get it to do in the most like frictionless, most efficient way, provided you know how to do that. And if you have bad alignment, that doesn't mean you can't achieve the thing. It just means you're going to do it at a cost. So, and that's the thing I think people misunderstand about what I try to convey is like, I'm not saying you can't do jiu-jitsu with bad alignment. I'm saying you can't do it without a significant cost. So if you are 200 pounds and your training partner is 150 pounds, you can have dog shit alignment and you'll still probably make a bunch of stuff work. But good luck doing that if your training partner is 250 pounds, right? Good luck not injuring yourself catastrophically at some point because your body's twisted into a pretzel and a whole bunch of force got put on it.
You were saying about with weightlifting, right?
Yeah, that's the simplest way.
You could be heavy or bigger and be able to lift something heavy, but there's a cost.
There's a cost to it. There's always a cost, right? Everything in life has its price. So you can be functional, and I would say even probably pretty good at jiu-jitsu, despite having pretty poor alignment in a lot of situations, if you have enough physicality and enough like genetic gifts. But if you're just like Joe from accounting, who hasn't played a sport since he was in like elementary school, and you're not an athlete of any sort, yada yada, and you try and do
Joe, I hope you're listening.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And you try and do some of the movements that people advocate in jiu-jitsu, and you try to do them on like a guy who's bigger than you, you're gonna tear shit instantly. So alignment is made up of base, posture, and structure, which these are all words that every single person doing jiu-jitsu has probably heard, but most people just don't have good definitions for it. So just like the quick like we can go more in depth, but like the quick definition is that base is a platform from which to apply and absorb force, ideally maximal force, and it's relative to your goals and it's relative to your opponent. Posture is the integrity of your spinal column. Right. So I mean, I really don't need to go into it more than that. But like when people hear posture, they think stand really upright and straight, or like military posture. Like that's not necessarily what we're talking about. We're talking about just maintaining the integrity of your spinal column. So your spine can bend and it can twist to a certain degree. But as soon as that bending or twisting is weakening you, then you've got poor posture. As long as the integrity of your spinal column is such that your muscles essentially work well and you are as strong as you need to be in the position, you've got good posture. And then you've got structure, which is the efficient positioning of your limbs to achieve a goal. That's the trickiest one because people tend to figure out base and posture, like once they hear the definitions, like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Posture is kind of cool because it's essentially like, can you move their head, right? Can you move their hips in relation to their shoulders, or
all of that?
You know, like it, and no matter which direction they're facing, it's actually kind of the same thing over and over again. Versus like today, you were showing how base, like in that sweep we were doing, right? You're like, you still had base, and you were using your head as base, right? Versus a hand, versus
whatever,
all those different types of things.
Yeah. So structure is the trickiest because when we say it's the efficient positioning of your limbs to achieve a goal, depending on the goal, right? Like if you just take one of your legs off the mat, you're not going to have great base, right? Doesn't mean you'll necessarily fall over, but like you're certainly compromising your base. That's, again, people just like figure that out pretty quickly. But if I tell you that I want you to position your arm in a way where you can keep me away from you, you would probably lock your elbow out and stick your arm out straight and like put your hand on my chest, like, or on top of my head, like Big Brother style.
That's exactly what I would do. I did it today. I pushed down and just, and I got armbarred.
Well, but that's not necessarily wrong. Like if I wanted to keep you away and I posted my hand on, let's say, your collarbone in a way where you were pushing into me and I was trying to efficiently just like create a frame, like maybe I use my elbow, but if I have to use my arm at arm's length and I place my arm on your body and I lock it out, that is the most efficient way of doing that. It's not the most efficient way of like keeping it if you can start to move around it. Because the reason what happened to you happened today is not that you extended your arm. It's that you extended your arm at an inappropriate angle to an inappropriate target on my body. So if we were just both standing straight up and facing each other and I said, keep me from getting any closer to you, and you just locked your elbow out, that would be good structure to achieve that goal. But if I said, don't get armbarred, sticking your arm straight out in the air and locking your elbow out would be the worst possible way to achieve that goal. So you can have a exact like duplicate limb position that in one case is perfectly good structure and in another case is the worst structure you could conceive of. So that takes a while for people to figure out. It's like, what is good structure? So we try to give them this heuristic, which is whenever possible, use bone instead of muscle.
Okay.
So if I'm trying to support weight, whether it's my weight, my opponent's weight, or our combined weight, I would like to stack my bones in a way where I'm not relying on muscular force to hold us up. But if you have to use muscle, you probably want to use all the muscle available to get the job done. So like in the armbar example, if I have to use muscle to defend an armbar, and my version of that is I'm going to use my biceps to stop you from armbarring me. That is not likely to work unless I'm like the mountain from Game of Thrones and you're a child, right? So as soon as we start to take the entire force of our body against an arm, biceps curl doesn't work. This works better because I've recruited a little bit more muscle. And what I'm doing is gable gripping my hands. This, and so now I've gone biceps deep, so I'm doing a rear naked choke grip. This works even better because now I've recruited a little bit more muscle, right? Like my lat is engaged, you know, my trap is engaged, like more of my posterior chain is engaged. If I then crunch up and stick my knee in front of my elbow, good luck pulling my arm away from my body. I've engaged my core, I've engaged my back. So I can add a necessary amount of muscle to get the job done, and that's what I need to do. So that's what makes good structures. Use bone instead of muscle, but if you have to use muscle, you want to use all the muscle available to get the job done. Don't try to like skimp out. You know, don't be like, I think my fingers are probably going to get the job done and preventing you from pulling my arm away from my
So
body.
how much do you have students like explore like finding ways to create good structure versus like demonstrating something like that? Like to say, here's a pathway to
Well, so
defend
that's,
and
you know,
showing it.
like we'll have games based
right?
around that,
Yeah.
right? Like there are games that are just based around like support somebody's weight.
Yeah.
You know, like understand what it means to have somebody leaning on you
Yeah.
in side control where they're trying to put their chest on your chest, and how can you prevent that from happening? And then the flip side of that is the top player is trying to change a frame into a lever. So I think a good chunk, if not the majority of jiu-jitsu, is a frame lever battle. You want to make frames on me, and I want to create levers to control your body.
Versus fighting into the frames.
Yeah, exactly. So most people run into frames like a glitchy video game character just like bouncing off of a wall.
Yeah.
Right? And then people who are good can make very solid frames seem, you're like, man, are my arms really this weak? What the hell? And it's not because your arms are actually weak. It's because they're able to rotate their body around the axis of the frame where it's making contact and just melt through your frames, right? So most people misunderstand frames as being like pushing mechanisms when they're not. They're like, you want to try to rest the frame against somebody's body and then have just enough isometric tension that they can't redirect that frame. So like optimal framing, we use the term scaffold a lot at my club.
good word.
Like I want you to build a scaffold. Because a scaffold doesn't have like a single point where if you just turn, it collapses. As opposed to creating what's called a moment arm.
Scaffolding doesn't push.
Exactly. It just bears weight, right? So when we're building frames, we're building scaffold. As opposed to creating what's called a moment arm, right? So a moment arm in physics is like basically when you're acting on the end of a lever, right? Or I think they just call it a moment, but like moment arm. Like for instance, if I'm trying to support weight here versus supporting weight there, so like I'm using the bones of my forearm directly underneath the pressure as opposed to like the end of my fingertips where my hand is folding. So like if you're controlling like if you're doing a bench press and you have the weight rolling back towards your fingers as you support the weight, that's a moment arm. That's very dangerous, obviously, because you can either break your wrist or you can like have 180 pounds fall on your chest. So you want the weight kind of supported right over the bones of your forearm at a 90-degree angle, because that's how you most efficiently can support that weight and push it if you need to, but just strictly holding the weight is what you're looking for. So when we build scaffolding, that's a very difficult frame to like penetrate or redirect. Whereas if you just post one hand or like just your elbow on somebody, that's not a great, it's functional and you can use it. But the more robustness there is to your frame, the more layers there are, the more redundancy there is to the frames that you're building, the more impenetrable your defense is. The more you're relying on a single point of contact with the frame, the less likely that frame is to be like as useful over time against a good opponent, because they'll just redirect it. Redirecting frames is basically what the top player is doing, and maintaining frames while trying to access levers to like off balance somebody is essentially what the bottom player is doing. Like regardless of if we're talking about guard or not, right? Like if you're mounting me, I still need to off balance you to get out of there. Like I need to shift your weight in such a way where I'm supporting it on the scaffold that I've built. And then I can start to move out from underneath you, or I need to access a lever to like manipulate the level of your hips so I can move out from underneath you. So it's like the idea of kazushi as being like a standing thing or a guard thing. That's not even really accurate. It's just literally if I'm on bottom, I need to move your ass if you're on top, right? So it's regardless of the position.
Or you were saying like creating frames to move yourself.
Creating frames to move myself,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But even to do that, I usually have to put you on top of those frames if you're not volunteering to be on them.
Pressure into it, yeah.
Right? Like generally the passer will do that. They'll volunteer to be on top of the frames. When someone's mounting you, they won't volunteer to be on top of the frames. You have to put them on top of the frames, and that requires a certain displacement of their body weight.
Sure.
Right. So sorry, we kind of went down a rabbit hole on structure.
okay.
No,
but
it's
like that's what we're trying to convey to people when we're talking about alignment is I want you to in every position relative to your opponent. So like if I had to encapsulate what jiu-jitsu is, aside from like the beauty stuff that I was talking about, like the yielding stuff in the water, which I have a point to make about that if we can remember, is that at the sort of the ground level, at the baseline level, what jiu-jitsu is just the battle of alignment between two people. If I have better alignment, if I have base and posture and structure, which are the constituent parts of alignment, and you don't have any of that, you have no base, no posture, no structure, I will fuck you up. Like no matter who you are just about on the planet, if you have literally no contact with anything that allows you to generate maximal force or even decent force, if your arms are all twisted out like into a weak position, if your spine is super twisted, what are you going to do to stop me? Right? Like, so just like the baseline level of understanding of jiu-jitsu as a bunch of moves that you're trying to do to another person, I think is pretty inadequate. And I think that's how most people are taught it and try to learn it. And trying to learn all of the moves in jiu-jitsu or even some of the moves in jiu-jitsu without the underlying understanding that these moves only work in the context, like all things being equal, right? Because obviously like anything works on beginners who just like dive, like put themselves in triangles because they don't know what triangles look like. But like outside of that context, all we're ever doing is I'm trying to make sure I have superior alignment to you. And the more of a disparity there is between our relative alignment, the more I can do to you. So like if you're really good and I take away your posture a little bit, I probably can't submit you, but I might be able to threaten to sweep you. If I take your base away, I can for sure sweep you. And then your reaction to that might allow me to then submit you, or it might allow me to get on your back, which will increase the chances of me submitting you. If I'm mounting you and you have perfect alignment, there's no disruption in your base, your posture, and your structure, and I've got not good base. So like, let's say the relative alignment score there between us is 3-2 for you, but I'm mounting you, you'll escape. So it's not the mount that has the inherent, like there are inherent mechanical advantages to the mount, but they are not so great that if you mess up your alignment to the point where your body becomes less effective and we're about the same size and about the same experience, there's no reason you should be able to hold the mount on me. By the same token, there's no reason you should be able to escape the mount if you are twisted up and blah, 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 and I'm not. And I've taken your arm, your elbow above your shoulder line or broken your posture. There is absolutely no reason that any mount escape that you've learned should work under those circumstances unless I make a mistake.
Well, you were kind of saying that earlier. You're talking about with training with Kaio and being like Kaio Terra, and saying about like how he knows so much of this stuff kind of intuitively, but you have to get him to, I guess, reframe as a pun, but like you have to get him to kind of explain it through those terms back towards you.
Yeah, and which is what I do with anybody I train with. Like I need to translate it into my language, because if it's just a matter of memorizing every detail, man, I'm not Kaio Terra, and none of us are. And there are people who understand this on such a deep level that, like, for them, it literally is, I remember every millimeter of where I put my body versus your body, and that's not possible for everyone.
Man, that was hard to find a spot to split this into 2 episodes. Rob and Dusty were just laying down such amazing details and thoughts and concepts. We wanted to keep it going, but we did need to break this into 2 different episodes. So we ended this episode with Rob talking about how using the conceptual framework of alignment can actually help you convert what great practitioners are doing into a system, or really just kind of break down their system to help you understand and ultimately learn what they're doing that's making them successful and how it lies back on those base principles. So thank you for listening. We'll be releasing part 2 next week of our discussion. In that part 2, we talk a bit more about how to design jiu-jitsu games to improve faster. We also do a bit of topic roulette and du jour, covering a lot of different topics from like different jiu-jitsu wisdom, things that we found impactful. So as stated before, if you would like to learn more about how to apply alignment principles to your training, please support Rob's work. He has a subscription site, which is bjjconcepts.net, and he also has instructionals on grapplearts.com. And if you find yourself in Duluth, Minnesota, please check out Dusty's gym, Drengr Jiu Jitsu. And also, if you want to be on the podcast, please just let us know. Just send us an email at info@thegrapplingpodcast.com. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Thank you so much.